Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 7, Chapter 12, titled The Perfect Society for Spiritual Classes. Text number 7. Varjayat pramadagatam agrahasto brihadvrata indriyani pramatini parantyapi yatermana Varjayat pramadagatam agrahasto prihadvrata indriyani pramatini parantyapi yatermana Varjayat pramadagatam agrahasto prihadvrata Indriyani pramatini parantyapi yatermana Varjayat must give up pramadagatam talking with women agrahasta a person who has not accepted the grahasta ashram a brahmachari or sannyasi brihad vrata invariably observing the vow of celibacy indriyani the senses pramatini almost always unconquerable paranti take away api even yate of the sannyasi mana the mind translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. A brahmachari, or one who has not accepted the grihastha ashram, family life, must rigidly avoid talking with women or about women, for the senses are so powerful that they may agitate even the mind of a sannyasi, a member of the renounced order of life. Purport. Brahmacharya essentially means the vow not to marry, but to observe strict celibacy, brihad vrata. A brahmachari or sannyasi should avoid talking with women or reading literature concerning talks between man and woman. The injunction restricting association with women is the basic principle of spiritual life. Associating or talking with women is never advised in any of the Vedic literatures. The entire Vedic system teaches one to avoid sex life so that one may gradually progress from brahmacharya to grihastha, from grihastha to vanaprastha, and from vanaprastha to sannyasa, and thus give up material enjoyment, which is the original cause of bondage in this material world. The word brihadrata refers to one who has decided not to marry, or in other words, not to indulge in sex life throughout his life. Om Gena Tamandasya Gyananjana Shlakaya Chakshamatamyana Tasmai Shri Guru Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhaktivinoda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So, in our discussion of the Varnashram system, we are continuing the section talking about the Brahmachari ashram. And Narada Muni is making the point here that one who is a brahmachari or a sannyasi, anyone who has not accepted householder life, must rigidly avoid talking with women or about women, and in general must control their senses. This is the basic viewpoint of the spiritual society, of the Vedic society, is how to control the senses. Uh, Many of us have the experience of working under a bad boss, of working under somebody who is uh, maybe too demanding, doesn't communicate well, the various horrors of having to work under a manager that is not competent or just in general not very good. And that is a very distressing position. We don't like to do it. Uh, we want, at least if we have a boss, for that boss to be understanding, competent, etc. But we don't realize we actually constantly have six bosses. They never give us a break. We don't even take a weekend from them. They're never satisfied. As soon as you do one thing for one of these bosses, either that boss uh, is again demanding or another one of them starts to demand. And these bosses, of course, are the senses, centered around the mind. Because most of material enjoyment is centered in the mind. It is the center of all these senses. And the way that the more subtle parts of the living entity, the false ego, and ultimately the soul, contact uh, or experience the sense objects through the senses filtered through the mind. And the most emblematic of all sense enjoyment, emblematic of material existence itself, is sex life. If one actually analyzes it, the sexual enjoyment is really just the touch sensation. But the mind expands it to everything, expands it to hearing, to sight, to smell. If one uh, thinks about it, for example, there's nothing inherently gratifying about the smell of perfume, for example. If it's just in and of itself, nothing there. But when one smells it, one associates the touch sensation, and even sight. You know, it might seem very natural that when one looks on a very beautiful man or woman, that very attractive. But not every living entity sees it that way, right? I look on the female cockroach and find it very disgusting, right? Might look upon, a female human, not have that reaction, right? But it works the other way also, right? The cockroach sees a person, no matter how beautiful, just, as a piece of meat, right? But sees the female cockroach. Oh, very nice. So the entire material energy, the entire material universe is moving under this sex attraction. It is why this society has grown more and more and more. There's this famous pastime where Srila Prabhupada had just given sannyas initiation, lifelong monasticism, to one of his disciples. He asked this disciple a very interesting question. They're in New York, and he asked the sannyasi, uh, the women in New York, They're very beautiful, aren't they? The sannyasi thought, is this some kind of test, right? He's a monk now. He's not supposed to be noticing women. Why is Prabhupada asking him? So he didn't answer, and Prabhupada asked him again. These New York women, they're very beautiful. He didn't say anything. And Prabhupada said, you can tell because the buildings are so tall. Why would they build it unless the women were so beautiful? There's another similar pastime where Prabhupada, he was being driven somewhere and he was stuck in traffic. And there's a huge traffic jam on the interstate. Just looked around at all the cars and said, simply sex life. Because uh, this artificial civilization is all there simply in order to uh, attract people to us. Oh, I'm such a big person. You should be with me. That is the sum and substance of this technological society. Because actually, our needs are very simple, right? We need approximately 6 feet to lay down at night. We don't even need a pillow. Our arms can do. Just need something to eat, but, maybe not now, but because, trees and Kali Yuga. But generally speaking, you can go into the forest, find fruits or roots or things like that and eat those. So you don't need all these slaughterhouses. Uh, if you need to get out of the weather, there's caves. So this technological society is artificial, right? It doesn't actually solve any problems. It just creates more. But it is there because we think this advancement will make us more attractive. It will allow us to enjoy our senses in this way more. That is why the Srimad Bhagavatam, the entire Vedic system, is geared towards having one transcend sex life. Actually, if one looks at the ashram system, brahmachari, grihastha, vanaprastha, and sannyas, in three, sex life is completely forbidden. And in one, it's strictly regulated. So, as Guru Maharaj says, that should tell you what Vedic society thinks about this activity. Because if one is agitated in this way, one cannot peacefully sit and consider spiritual life. We all have the experience. I don't need to go into details of being agitated by this desire. And it just completely takes the mind one way or the other, back and forth. Uh, so, by regulating it in one way or another, the mind can become peaceful in order to actually sit down and study, understand spiritual life. And this regulation comes from regulating senses. We might think that we can, just sit somewhere and just try to control the mind. No matter what happens, I'll just stay aloof. I'll sit here and, not think of any sense enjoyment. You might be able to do that in some circumstances, but the senses are very powerful. The mind is very powerful. Even Arjuna says to Krishna at the end of the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita that the mind is more powerful than the wind uh, and difficult to control. So, how can this Ashtanga system, this system of controlling the mind that you gave me, I find it very impractical. And that's Arjuna, right? Think about how qualified Arjuna was. Arjuna says it's more difficult to control than the wind, but he had certain ostras, certain weapons by which he actually could control the wind. You know, Today we have bombs, fire weapons, but back then they had fire weapons and wind weapons and water weapons and even nuclear weapons. Uh, so Arjuna actually could control the wind, but he says, I still cannot control my mind. So that should tell us how powerful the mind is and how powerful the senses are. So the Vedic system of Dharma, of the different rules and regulations for the various ashrams and varnas, are made with the idea of helping us control the senses. Uh, so that we might be able to advance in spiritual life. This is actually the advantage of the Vedic system. Sometimes when I'm on calls, uh, international calls or something, uh, for example, I'm doing Bhakti Shastri now over Zoom. Uh, One of the teachers said, he saw I was wearing saffron. And I had mentioned before when he was asking where everybody was from that I live in the US. And, you know, the response, especially from Indian body devotees, is, oh, being a brahmachari in the West, is very difficult. Because, there's the idea that, the culture of, separation, the understanding of brahmacharya isn't there. Of course, nowadays in many places, India is also becoming the West. Uh, but the idea is that the system should be set up to assist this fight against sex desire, whether in the brahmachari ashram or in the other ashrams. As Gurudev says when he talks about these topics, that one needs a stance, right? So he compares it to martial arts, right? So, when you're fighting, you have a certain stance. And there are different ones, right? Well, somebody could have one stance, somebody could have another stance. Uh, Generally speaking, when, at least when one is younger or making the decision, the choice is between, brahmacharya or grihastha, to stay a monk lifelong, or to enter householder life. Both are meant for overcoming the sex desire. Either one avoids it completely, uh, which is the path that I would recommend if you're able to do it, or one enters into it in a regulated way. Uh, of course, the section that we're reading now is about brahmacharya, and it is generally recommended that if one can stay brahmachari and avoid the grihastha ashram, then that is usually better. It's a much simpler life, as I'm sure the grihasthas can tell you. It can become very complicated with children and jobs and married life and all of these things. But if one does not wish to stay brahmachari, the Grihastha ashram uh, is there, and it has the same goal of purifying ourselves, of controlling sex life, so that we may advance in Krishna consciousness. But the basic principle is there, sense control. Because, even in the Grihastha ashram, It is not a free for all. It is not that once you have the yagya, walk around the sacred fire, that you can do whatever you want. That is grihamedi, not grihasta. Uh, Uncontrolled householder life rather than controlled. Because the idea is still control is always there. Uh, Prabhupada even sometimes uses this term, brahmachari grihasta, uh, for the renounced householder. And uh, the grihasta, of course, eventually takes vanaprastha. Uh, Generally speaking, and if you go look into the details more, it actually depends on one's varna. But we can say for this day and age, when we don't have the full varna system, that grihastas should become vanaprasthas, which is the state of life where there is still some contact between husband and wife, but they're starting to separate. Uh, there's no more sex life, uh, but they might still live together, might live separately, uh, but the uh, focus goes again from uh, family affairs to renunciation. Jayadvaita Maharaj is writing a book on Vanaprastha. Uh, I don't think it's out yet, but he has some articles on his website. And the way that he puts it is that the Grahasta, uh, just because just because of the practicalities of the ashram, most of your attention is on practical things, family affairs. Maybe 80-20 practical affairs to spiritual life. Of course, that's not everybody. We have some examples of uh, householders who do have most of their focus on uh, immediate practical spiritual life. But, he's making the point that most of the focus during Grihasta life is on practical things. So if it's, for example, 80-20, during Vanaprastha, it should become 20-80, right? The It should flip so that the main focus is on uh, spiritual life. And, we should consider the uh, Vanaprastha ashram as a stage that those who have taken the Grihastha ashram eventually enter into. It's not always as visible in our society. Prabhupada, he made brahmacharis, he made grihastas, and he made sannyasis, but none of the grihastas were old enough while he was on the planet to become vanaprasthas, right? He wasn't uh, displaying his pastimes long enough for his grihasta disciples to grow old and enter the vanaprastha ashram. So it wasn't as visible during his time, but uh, we should uh, consider this as part of the life cycle of a devotee. That okay, I give up my grihasta affairs and start focusing on spiritual life again. You know, the children are out of the house. Maybe they're married or working or have their own place. Maybe grandchildren have started to appear. Then you should think, okay, now's the time for me to stop uh, with all of this activity. Maybe you stay in your house. Maybe you move back into the temple uh, and focus on completely on spiritual life. And then once that renunciation goes even more. For the men, they can take sannyas, uh, which is the final ashram, uh, where the renunciation is complete. Generally, sannyasis, most of the time, don't even have a fixed place to stay. We see Gurudev, he's traveling all the time, one place to the other. Most of the sannyasis uh, are jet setters. Uh, they're constantly traveling from one place to the other, uh, spreading spiritual knowledge everywhere. And the sannyas ashram is considered to be the perfection of renunciation. They renounce everything, right? Because even in the brahmacharya ashram, I'm sitting here, but I can still maybe become attached to my room, to the things that I use to do services around here, maybe a particular vehicle that I use to drive into town or something like that. Certain circumstances. For a sannyasi, the circumstances are always changing, the rooms are always changing, the people around you are always changing. So this is supposed to be full renunciation. But Narada Muni is warning here that the senses are so powerful that they may agitate even the mind of a sannyasi, a member of the renounced order. So, in all stages of life, the rules and regulations are there, especially, for the uh, saffron club, uh, as Gurudev put it. Uh, I can't remember exactly the words he used, but something like that. The saffron club, the brahmacharis and the sannyasis. Regulation around association with women. Uh, Sridhar Swami, in his commentary, uh, somewhere in the sixth canto, I can't remember the exact verse, uh, gives the behavior for a brahmachari. Smaranam kirtanam keli, prekshanam uh, smaranam kirtanam keli, prakshanam guyabhushanam, sankalpa adyavayascha, kriya nivitir evacha. Uh, a brahmachari should not think about women, should not speak about them, should not engage in flirtatious behavior, uh, should not look lustfully at them, should not talk in a secret place, should not make the determination to engage in sex life, should not endeavor to engage in sex life, and should not actually engage, should not complete the act, kriya nivriti, uh, engage in that activity. Uh, because if one does any of these things, even thinking or meditating on, the senses and the mind can become uncontrolled. Dayayato vishayan pumsas sangaste shupajayate sanjayate kama uh, kama krodo bijayate. Uh, that by meditating on the objects of the senses, one develops attachment for them. And from this attachment, lust develops. And from lust, anger. Uh, so it is actually by meditation on the objects of the senses that the senses become agitated, that the mind becomes agitated. Uh, and one enters into this chain that uh, ends, in the end of the next verse, Vinashyati, complete destruction. Or as Prabhupada translates it, entering it again into the material pool. So, and the separation, the rules and regulations of the brahmacharya and sannyas ashrams, and the grihastha and vanaprastha ashrams as well, uh, have some separation or at least regulation there, so that one does not have the impressions that cause one to meditate on the sense objects. But we can also understand that, yes, we do follow these rules and regulations, but the one must also endeavor to control the mind, no matter what the external circumstances are. You know, uh, it works both ways. Now, we shouldn't have the uh, conception that we can just do whatever we want and try to control the mind, because that makes it very difficult. Uh, I have heard some people say before that, oh, a true brahmachari, no matter what circumstances you put them in, uh, they'll be able to control the mind. Which, okay, yes, true. But I've heard that sometimes used as an excuse for putting brahmacharis into circumstances that they should not be put into. But it is true that even in unfavorable circumstances, uh, the brahmachari should learn to control the mind, because simply uh, avoiding is not practical. There's the pastime. It's told multiple places. We read it mostly in the ninth canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, but it's also there in Mahabharata and even told in the Ramayana of Rishishringa. So Rishishringa's father was a great sage, and I won't go into all the twists and turns that made him think this, uh, but he thought, let me raise my dear boy as a perfect brahmachari, as a perfect rishi in the forest. So he made his ashram in the forest, and Rishishringa, until he was older, never saw a woman. Uh, and so one day he was sitting there, he was doing his austerities. But the thing is that in the next kingdom over, it had been cursed for that they would have a drought. No rain was coming. Of course, no rain means no grains. No grains means no food. The king was in a lot of anxiety. Uh, Thank you. Uh, so the king was in a lot of anxiety uh, because it was his job to make sure that the kingdom is fed. So uh, he, consults, the brahmanas, different rishis, to figure out how to alleviate this curse. And he figures out, there's this great sage, Rishishringa, in the ashram nearby. As soon as he steps into your kingdom, then rain will come again. Uh, and and he figures out, and he thinks, how do I do this, right? How do I get Rishishringa here? Because his father is not going to want him to come with a king, right? King is very opulent, riches, court members, uh, all of the all of that. So the king, while the rishi is away, while Rishishringa's father is away, sends a group of women into the ashram to entice Rishishringa's mind. despite never having seen them. As soon as he sees and interacts with them, the mind goes. So total avoidance is not the answer either, because it actually isn't possible. There's so many examples. Sobri Muni, he was under the water, saw two fish engaged uh, in these activities, and that agitated his mind. Right? So, uh, yes, we follow the rules and regulations, but we also control the mind. The ultimate way of controlling the mind is param drishtam nivartante, having the higher taste, having a higher vision, or a higher goal, which is, of course, the process of Krishna consciousness. That we attach ourselves to Krishna and by that become detached from the world. So we have about 15-ish minutes left. I'll stop here. If there are any comments or questions? I guess we'll start with our in-person audience. Oh, yeah, Mataji. Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Mhm. Mhm. So, and you're talking about somebody who's like living at home. Like you're talking about somebody who's like living like out in the world. Make your home into the spiritual world, right? Bhaktivinoda Thakur, of course, he's very elevated, but he sets the example, right? He has, he in I think one of his songs or maybe one of his writings, he says he's doing arti, and his home transforms into Vaikuntha, right? Uh, so the uh, whether one is living materially or spiritually doesn't necessarily depend on location, right? One can be in the temple and still meditating on sense enjoyment, right? It's not just because somebody's wearing saffron that, they're like a perfected human being, right? It all depends on our determination, right? If you have the determination to practice and to control the mind, you can change the circumstances, at least some in your life, to facilitate that mm, that desire. Right, and there are ways that people do it. Right, there's the saintly personality sitting next to you. Uh, has family. Has all these. And lives in Los Angeles. Right. Yeah. As far as cities go, Los Angeles is Los Angeles. Right. So there are ways to do it. It just requires guidance. It's very kind of specific to somebody's individual circumstances of how they're doing it. Um, and you mentioned being a brahmacharini. Uh, if one is not married and not necessarily planning to get married, one could always move into a temple, right? Move into an ashram to have that association. So the option is there. But like I said, it depends on one's individual circumstances. Do you formulated your question? That's all right. Mhm. Oh, okay. Do you have a question? Yeah. Oh, so the king sent the ladies to where Rishishringa was staying. Rishishringa was staying in his father's ashram, like his father's place, and the king sent the ladies to uh, his father's ashram while the father was away, uh, so that they could try to get Rishishringa to come back to his kingdom so that the reign could start again. Yeah, yeah. Brahmachari ashram. Yeah, yeah. Hmm. Mhm. Mhm.
Prabhu, if possible, can you repeat or summarize the questions?
Yeah. So the question was basically, do I have any advice as a member of the Saffron Club, uh, about controlling the mind or, pursuing that sort of lifestyle? Yeah, and I would say actually the advice comes from the Bhagavatam, knowledge and detachment. Or, as Guru Maharaj put it before years ago when I was asking him something related, he said, make a scientific study of this uh, area of activity. Um, and, if one actually does that, one can gain the understanding, you know, this, this stuff is not where it's at, right? I won't go too much into detail right now, both because we are running low on time and there are little ears around. Uh, but yeah, when one makes actually a scientific study of these things, then it uh, increases one's renunciation. Uh, but I will add, to actually understand the study, one has to have a lifestyle in the mode of goodness. Because as we read in Bhagavad Gita, Prabhupada explains in the purports there that only in the mode of goodness can one uh, understand things in their proper way. If one is living a lifestyle predominated by the lower modes, then one simply becomes confused. So if one follows the rules and regulations that Prabhupada gave us, uh, the basic things that he gave us in devotional service, a lot of those are actually bringing us to the mode of goodness. Rising early, eating sattvic food, things like that, so that we can actually understand these things. So yeah, lifestyle is important, and study is important. I will. All right, we have about 5 minutes left in case there are any last comments or questions. Yeah. Hmm? To transmute? Uh, is it possible to transmute lust? Yes and no. I think the question uh, contains an assumption that is not necessarily correct. Lust is actually the reflection, the perverted reflection of something, of the adiras, of the original conjugal love between Krishna and the gopis. So it's not that it has to be transmuted into something else. It's that we stop corrupting, you could say, the original taste that is there. Uh, there are all of these techniques that people use to transmute, but usually what they're actually talking about is transmuting it into some other material activity, which is not what we want to do. We don't want to go from one material activity to another. We want to get out of material activity completely, which requires uncovering or realizing the true rasas, the true emotional relationships between Krishna and the devotees. This is elaborately explained in Nectar of Devotion. Have you read Nectar of Devotion? Yeah, so it's the summary study of the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Uh, so yeah, you can read Nectar of Devotion, and then Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu is coming out. I keep hearing this year. I don't know if there's an exact date, but a full BBT translation is coming out. So after you've read all of Prabhupada's books 3 times, uh, then you can start reading the books of the Goswamis, including Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Although generally you start with Brihad Bhagavatam. Uh, all right, I will. Uh, unless there's any literally last minute questions or comments, we can end here. Srimad Bhagavatam ki. Jaya Radha Damodara Radha Damodara Shri Radhe. Jaya Radha Damodara Radha Jaya Radha. Jaya Radha Jaya Radha Jaya Shri Radhe. Jailavita, Shakalavita, Vishakasira, Jailavita, Shakalavita, Sambushira, Jailavita, Shakalavita, Jaya Sajidai Suna Gora Jaya Nitai Gora Sundai Jai Gora Hari Jaya Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Prabhupada Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Giant Father, justifies, salvation, His divine grace, AC Bhagavatam, Swamara, Parvati, stock down and try. Wow. Try to push him out. Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Parvati, Namakar, Shivaya Authority. President of the Church, According to Namo, Shri Devi Maharaj, Shri Sarvati Mohan Bhakti. If you like Krishna Goku, Gopinath, Thomas, God, Jimmy Goku, Srimad, Gana Mike, Buddha Mike, Boss David, Lost David, Anand Deva, Cody Vashna Reddy, I also care from Yogi. Sorry, Bob and Dean, Nita, Nandini, all works of bodies, all works of bodies, all works of bodies, all works of Shri Guru and Shri Maranda, all works of Chilakapa. The lotus feet of the fourth mask is clearly laid on the team, carried on the foot. I got out of the lotus feet to create on mountains. By his grave, it crossed the ocean of material stuff, taking the roots of Christian. My only wish got my conscience purified by the word of the name of the The path of the lotus feet is the perfection, fills all life. The other my argument fills the box with the money. Here the word of God. From the entire created enemies, buying into the stone. The base scriptures to the spirit. Our third master is the oath of mercy, friend of the law, the Lord master of the world. Oh, master, he is the Lord. Those of shame and those of hell. Your favor shall all be yours. The divine way, they can go out to line and around for 5 years. I think the same for me. Never was. Yeah, what sounds yeah. Some figure you are. Oh, no, it's you know, that wasn't be a patient. That's it. Well, your thoughts, you know. What essence? Better. Yeah, it's all exactly, yeah. Yeah. So now, someone. Well, I don't have to go far. Go ahead. I'll have a few. Understood. What's that's a yeah, that's I mean, I just don't understand. But it's a state that's there. Yeah, we're gonna go to bus train.
Yeah, but then when Marley from Nagari sometimes gets upset and he's there's mom. Yeah. Yes. Well, so Nagari and Marley pretend together. Yeah. Yeah, they're brothers. Nice time. So, she goes to the tired. Peter. How did glad you can see. Yes, thanks. I have to make it. Maybe there. Yes. Or not to and we switch. These and those but it's not making me run a lot. It's like a 10 11. It's too strong and sad. But now all of us. No players now. Minor three is the wrong players. Today at 7 p.m. Okay. Only on Wednesday morning. Tomorrow, you will be able to. But you play with the sheet, well, enhance his what they are trying to see if we get the other flights. To early morning, sir. Okay, I can have together. So, so I made him resolve. Okay, and then tonight, I just want to do. Yes. Okay, so maybe he can jump on that. Five. So areas, it's easier than it's easier. Yeah. So please tell them to borrow. Yes, I do. I need to. My was. Yes. Yeah. No. That's the one. Yes. They don't come on this one. I can. You need to come back to me. Yeah. Okay. Did you? Oh. Yeah. What's this? You like? So,